In today's video, we have the latest trade talk from the Montreal Canadiens and a potential goalie move. We're going to talk about the Vancouver Canucks as well. We have some more information and comments from Elliotte Friedman regarding the future of Elias Pettersson in Vancouver. Plus, we also have another NHL player has announced his retirement. A bunch more PTOs have been announced, as well as the Maple Leafs signing another defenseman. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and a little bit of trade talk to take a look at here today as well. Of course, we're going to start the video off with another retirement. We've had a lot of NHL players announcing their retirement here as of late, although this is typically the main time of year when you do tend to get most of that. A lot of these players have taken the summer to kind of contemplate their future. Some of these players we've seen retire were not surprising. Few that have been, but nothing too crazy. But today's announcement comes from Jonas Donskoi, a longtime player, 474 games across the NHL. Started with the San Jose Sharks, which is where he played the most of his hockey. Played a bit with the Avalanche and then the Seattle Kraken as well. Played their first season. Unfortunately, had suffered numerous concussions throughout his career, and then did have another one in the initial season with the Seattle Kraken. Ended up not playing last year, and is fully contract's expired now, and he's fully retired. He announced this via his Instagram yesterday, and did talk about the fact that concussions certainly have played a role here. He appeared, like I said, in 474 games, put up 208 points, pretty decent player. He was a pretty good playoff performer too. He appeared in 69 playoff games and had 32 points. For somebody who was never a top line player, that's pretty decent numbers for somebody who was usually like a second, third line player. So Donskoi is officially done in the NHL. As I mentioned, we got some news on some PTOs and some other organizational changes here today as well. A bunch of PTOs. The Avalanche have announced they've signed former Dallas star Joel Kiviranta. He's going to go to Avalanche training camp on a PTO, so we'll see if he can land himself a spot there. He's certainly a player who had his moments in Dallas, but he's never really overly offensive, not a really good point producer. So, maybe the Avalanche might be able to find a potential bottom six role. Maybe it's a two-way deal. I'm not sure. But Kiviranta, will see if he can catch on here with the Avalanche. A couple of PTOs in Edmonton, some that we had already discussed via the rumor mill, but are now finally officially confirmed by Edmonton. And they've confirmed that former Vancouver Canuck, which where he played most recently, Brandon Sutter, who hasn't played in over a year due to some health issues. I think he was battling a form of like a long COVID. Brandon Sutter's going to camp with the Oilers on a PTO, and Sam Gagner going as well. Gagner going for his, I believe this is going to be his second return. Of course, he was drafted as a high pick of the Oilers, played there for the first number of years of his career, has bounced around to a variety of teams. He's already had one return back to Edmonton. This will be his second return back. See if he can earn himself another contract. Gagner's basically been one of those veteran players who's bounced around the last number of years on one-year deals, kind of going up and down between the NHL and the AHL. So we'll see if Gagner can catch on again with his original franchise that he started with. We also got some news out of Washington as well. The Washington Capitals today announced some organizational changes, including a promotion for longtime general manager Brian McClellan. He's actually been on the job for 10 years now, which is hard to believe. It's been that long. But McClellan is now going to be the president of hockey operations and the general manager, so he gets a promo to add to his title there. They've also promoted Dick Patrick to be the chairman, and Chris Patrick is now going to be the associate general manager. So some changes internally there in Washington. And as I mentioned before, the Coyotes continue to kind of slowly roll this out. But when they announced head coach Andre Tourigny was extended on a 3-year deal, I had heard via the rumor mill that the reason the contract extension took a little bit longer was that he wanted to have his full staff all re-upped as well, and they were taking some time to go through and negotiate with all of them on new deals. And then I think every day for like the last 4 days or something, they've been gradually rolling that out. Today they announced goalie coach Corey Schwab has also got his contract extension. So so you can expect Andre Tourigny and his full staff to be returning to the Coyotes organization this fall for another season, and they all have extensions for a few more years, all on multi-year deals. I mentioned as well we have a signing in Toronto. This one certainly, I think, caught a lot of people by surprise, but it's a player that's kind of interesting in a way. But the Maple Leafs have signed defenseman Simon Benoit, formerly of the Anaheim Ducks. He's got good size, 6'3", 208 pounds. He gets a 1-year deal, $775,000. He's was an RFA with the Ducks, didn't get a qualifying offer, and became an unrestricted free agent. Not exactly an analytics darling by any means. He's pretty much a stay-at-home physical defenseman. He's the type of guy who's not afraid to block shots. He'll get in the lanes. He'll certainly stick up for his teammates, not afraid to fight, throw some hits. That's kind of what he's known for. Not really a great puck mover. Not really going to get much of anything out of him offensively. So kind of like if you look at how the Leafs had Jordy Ben in the kind of role they gave him, I would suspect Simon Benoit to get a similar type of role. He will probably get some NHL games. It's really hard to say. I wouldn't be shocked, though, if he has to go through waivers to go down to the Marlies. At this point, for physicality on the blue line, outside of Jake McCabe, there's not really a ton there. I mean, you've got Morgan Rielly, you've got TJ Brody. Obviously, they signed John Klingberg. He's not really, that style of player. Timothy Liljegren, Mark Giordano. So, like, they could use a little bit more snarl, a little bit more physicality back there. He will bring that. I just don't know that he's strong enough to be an everyday player, but he can be, got somebody they can use as like spot duty and kind of be back and forth between the Leafs and the Marlies. At that kind of contract, though, it could benefit him maybe getting a little bit more time, depending on because the Leafs are always so tight up against it that they need every dollar they can get, right? So obviously making league minimum will help his case a little bit, but at the same time, I don't know that he's going to be able to crack their top 6, but he might be like a 7-8 type defenseman. Could come in handy come to playoffs, or if they run into any injuries, or if a player like McCabe, who's like I said, their main player to kind of provide that physical role back there, if he happens to go down with injury or anything, then they could call upon Benoit possibly as a replacement. So like you get the good and the bad. So like you get all the physical stuff. There's lots to like, but there's also lots to not like. So I don't know. It's kind of one of those cases where it's really not a huge win, but it's a depth move. And I know I've seen lots of Leaf players, or Leaf fans, sorry, not Leaf players, commenting about this on social media today. And for the most part, I think it was a positive response. But yeah, we'll see. He could be a factor in the playoffs. We'll have to wait and see on that front. Now, as I mentioned, regarding some of the rumor mill, I do want to take a look at Montreal and Vancouver. We'll start with the Habs here. Basically, at this point, the latest update on the Montreal Canadiens situation is Ken Hughes, the GM, is still trying to make moves. They're still trying to move a goaltender. They'd still like to shed another forward contract as well. They were able to move Hoffman and get in on that Erik Karlsson trade, sending him to the Sharks. But he's still for sure not done. Still hoping to get a body or two moved around before training camp opens if possible. They can carry more players for a little longer if they need to, but it's not really ideal. I know a player like Yoel Armia is a player that they'd like to move, and they have a number of players on short-term contracts in the forward group that are potential to go, but they just at this point there's just more of an overcrowding issue. But between the pipes, they've got 3 goalies after acquiring Casey DeSmith, of course, in that Erik Karlsson 3-way trade that they were able to get some players, including Jeff Petrie, who they've since moved and flipped to Detroit, and they're trying to do the same sort of thing with Casey DeSmith. But at this point, they still don't have a deal. They're asking him to be patient, which I'm sure at this point is challenging for him, not knowing where he's going to play this year. The only goaltender in the Habs organization that's been given any kind of reassurance that he's not really affected by any of it would be Samuel Montembeault. You have to think it's possible that if a team came along and showed a lot more interest in Jake Allen, that they'll consider it. Based on the comments from Ken Hughes, it sounds like it's that DeSmith is the preferred guy to flip, but it's not necessarily a full given that it's going to happen. But at the same time, in Jake Allen's case, he's got a bigger contract, which is more challenging to move. He also has some trade protection in his contract, which DeSmith does not. So I really don't think it's going to end up being him. I think DeSmith will be the guy that goes. But, carrying 3 goalies at the NHL level is possible with the huge LTIR pool that the Habs have, but it's not really ideal. And, at the same time, for camp, it could push everybody to work a little harder and see what they have to make sure they're earning their spots, I guess. But we'll see. I know when it comes to teams looking for goalies, I got to think, although the problem is a lot of the ones that come to mind have cap issues, and it's not going to be easy to figure out. But a team like Tampa comes to mind. I just don't know how they'd work in the contract like DeSmith. They'd have to move out something fairly substantial, comparable value, and Montreal's not really in a situation to take that on either. So it's not easy to do. But Tampa comes to mind for sure. I know I'm looking at LA if they see an opportunity for an upgrade, but they just signed Talbot. They had Phoenix Copley, who they signed late last year. They have David Riddick already in the organization as a number 3. I don't know if that really is going to go anywheres, but looking around the league, there's just not a lot of teams where there's glaring holes for that level of goaltender. There's a few teams that jump out as prime candidates if a big name starting goaltender like a Connor Hellebuck, for example, who's rumored to be available for trade, would make sense, but not at the level of the guys that we're talking about. So it's hard to say what's going to happen, but look for Montreal to continue to work at this, and we likely will see a deal or two in or around between now and camp, but depends on what they can find for trades. The other interesting thing I want to talk about is the future of Elias Pettersson in Vancouver. I know we've talked a bit before about maybe the Bruins having interest, but at the same time, that was really just hypothetical. Down the road, if it even gets to the point of a trade, would the Canucks, or would the Bruins really pursue him? And I think the answer is yes, because I think 31 other teams in the NHL would pursue this player if he's for sure on the trade market. He's that good. And to be honest, I would feel terrible for Vancouver if it gets to that point, but it's hard to say. But Elliot Friedman, who interviewed Pettersson recently over in Europe and Sweden, had more to say, talking to Vancouver media through the Sportsnet. He was on the Halford and Bro show, and basically he was asked point blank, where Pettersson's 1 year away from being a restricted free agent, said clearly to Elliot in the interview that he did that he's in no rush to re-sign whatsoever, that he wants to see how everything goes, and he's just focusing on himself and being able to get off to a best start as possible personally so he can help the team hopefully do the same. And he was asked, how much of the team's performance and how well they do this year is going to play a role in signing him. And he said it's very much a lot, if not all of it. So, should we be on high alert here that if the Canucks don't have a great season, there's a chance Pettersson's going to want to be moved? Now, as we've talked about Pettersson a few times in recent days since that interview was first conducted, I know I've had fans tell me, he's an RFA, you don't need to worry. It's I'm going to remind you about Matthew Tkachuk. Last year was an RFA with 1 year left. The same scenario. If any team is in a predicament with a high-level RFA and they say, listen, I don't want to be here anymore, I don't want to sign, you need to move me, then what are they supposed to do? Those players have more power and more control than you might think. It's the same sort of scenario. Pettersson could easily pull a Tkachuk if he decided to do that. If he really didn't want to be in Vancouver anymore, he could do that and make it happen. And ultimately, though, Friedman said that it's not a case of him not really wanting to be there. I think he'd love to stay and make it work. The problem is at this point is that the team has been mediocre to bad for a while, and he's getting to a point in his career where he wants to have a legit chance to win, which is understandable. Now, of course, the other part of this as well is that clearly in Pettersson's case, it's up to him to kind of lead by example here. He's hoping to either duplicate or exceed last year's high results that he was able to put up personally. But certainly, it's not going to be easy. They're in a tough division. That Pacific Division, and not long ago, was considered a very much a weak spot across the league. And now look, you get the most recent Stanley Cup champions. You got Vegas. Seattle's done well. Made the playoffs, got to the second round. The Kings have been pretty strong. You get the Oilers, the Flames. Like, it's no slouch anymore. It's going to be tough for Vancouver to get into a playoff spot and to jump over as many teams as they need to from last year to get into a playoff spot. So it's not going to be easy in the least. But if they get to a point that Pettersson says he doesn't want to sign, that's going to be a huge problem. Like, this Canucks team has already been not being able to reach its full potential, and obviously kind of middling, if you will. Like, you've been doing well enough that you can't get a high pick, but you're not doing well enough that you're not making the playoffs. You're kind of in that mushy middle, so to speak, which is a terrible spot to be. At some point, teams need to make an effort to be bad to get the high pick that's really going to help them, take the next step. You need a high-level prospect to help you do that. And when they were in that predicament, they got Pettersson, they got Hughes, and they have all this surrounding cast that has potential, and came into the league with a lot of expectations, and just haven't been able to put it all together. But certainly Pettersson appears like he's content and believes that the new coach Rick Tocchet and the new management team, that they know what they're doing, and he's comfortable with everybody. He's comfortable with the plan. Elliot says he just needs to see it actually work. It's one thing to hear something and kind of believe in people and want it to work, but it's another thing to actually make it work. And I'm sure, like I just said, like, you can look at this team and honestly question how they're going to become a playoff team. So I don't want to say, I think it's very premature to say if they miss the playoffs, he's done and out. I don't think that's the case, but I think he has to see the light at the end of the tunnel. He has to see a bright future. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm being pessimistic, but I have a hard time seeing it. So I do really wonder what kind of predicament they're going to be in as the year goes along. And I'd feel terrible for the Canucks and their fan base if he reached a point over the course of this year, if he doesn't want to be there anymore and does want to trade. That would be a devastating blow to that franchise, and it could be a real major setback because those trades are really, really difficult to win. So we'll have to see what happens, but it does sound like this year's performance of the Canucks will have an absolutely huge outcome to whether or not Pettersson resigns and remains in the Vancouver City and plays with the Canucks for the remainder or a big chunk of his career moving forward. So let me know your thoughts on all of today's news and rumors down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.